Liberalism has the pernicious tendency to often become atomism. That is, it's not just a society but a collection of individuals who, separated from each other, can form a society. This falls apart everywhere, doesn't it? Because you can ask a question, right? And that is, can liberalism coexist with morality? For that, we first have to define morality, and for that, we have to answer the question of whether morality exists. What is morality? Well, we need to make a distinction between morality and ethics, since these are two terms that are often confused. Morality is the set of practices, traditions, and customs that prevail in a society. Ethics is the individual ability that we humans have to reflect on morality, right? Morality in Spain includes bullfighting, which in other countries might be viewed as immoral or amoral if no judgment is made, right? Our ethics can lead us to different views on morality and bullfighting, right? Knowing that the moral code in Spain enshrines bullfighting, well, you could have a better or worse opinion of bullfighting, right? But morality is what exists. Morality, in my opinion, is hardly compatible with liberalism, which is based on individualistic atomism. Why? Well, because an individual who is granted any kind of guarantee, any kind of autonomy, can oppose the morality of a nation. An individual can reject the Christian values that have always absolutely prevailed in the history of the West. Well, we could acknowledge that an individual could be agnostic, we could acknowledge that he could be an atheist. That's more about freedom of religious belief than about morality. You can't erase the values that built your society. You can never attack the values that laid the groundwork for what has allowed you to be who you are. Liberalism doesn't address this, does it? Another core issue is that, in my view, liberalism led to today's globalization and globalism problems. What is globalization? In economic terms, it's the result of a highly accelerated form of capitalism that puts the ideology of consumerism above any kind of subjective assessment that we as citizens might make of the nation as a construct. But on a moral level, globalization is the destruction of the identity of nations. Look, I'll give you an example so you can understand how far this goes, okay? In 1933, the Montevideo Convention was signed. The Montevideo Convention, well, it was relevant from the point of view of international law because what it did was establish the definition of what a nation is, what a country is in a general sense, right? And in that definition, in the Montevideo Convention of 33, it was said that a nation was the sum of four elements. A population within the boundaries of a territory under the control of a government with legal capacity to enter into agreements with other sovereign states, right? This is an aseptically positivist definition that assumes that a nation is only population, territory, government, and capacity. This is a lie. The nation has a fifth element, which is identity. It is its culture. Saying a nation is just its population, territory, government, and capacity is like calling you, Jota, just flesh and bones. No, Jota is more than that. I am more than just flesh and bones. I am a DNA, a person, a spirit, a soul, a way of being, something that distinguishes me from others. Globalism directly attacks the fifth pillar, the soul and identity of nations, by imposing the new 21st century religion of woke culture. Let's not fool ourselves. The woke culture that is now embraced by the left is the result of globalization that comes from the wild liberalism we live in today. I mean, this left that claims to be Marxist, this left that says, well, anyway, yes, that it's revolutionary and goes against the status quo, is actually the most reactionary thing that exists. Today's parliamentary left isn't Marxist or communist, it's a post-neoliberal left. They don't talk about destroying capitalism, they talk about overcoming it. With what? Well, it depends on who you ask. Some are degrowth advocates, others are social democrats, but really they all draw directly from the foundations of liberalism. That's the problem. Conservatism must firmly oppose the notion that morality doesn't exist or should be replaced.
Why do you think the word identity has such extremely negative connotations nowadays?
Well, that's a very good question. I think it all comes from the Agenda 2030. Look, I think we need to reflect on this here. The Agenda 2030, which is, in political terms, a plan. Not in a conspiratorial way, but simply it's a plan, a strategy that all the United Nations member states must align with, since they unanimously approved it in 2015, the 193 countries of the United Nations. On a moral level, it is a political religion, which as a new political religion, seeks to destroy any trace of previous civilization in order to promise a new civilization. However, it is a political religion with a fundamental difference compared to any other Abrahamic religion. And the thing is, the Agenda 2030, unlike Christianity, Judaism, or Islam, does not give you the option to decide whether you want to follow that faith or not. You have to comply with it by legal mandate. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but that's how things are now. It's the promise of transhumanism. It's about promising again that idea of a super self, of a human being who can exist beyond borders and above the idea of a society and a nation, right? So what this does is blow up the identity of nations. And it does so in such a persuasive way that even the nations themselves believe that it's bad to have their own identity. One way to see this is, for example, what happens when Spain enters the European Union. When Spain enters the European Union, it cedes part of its sovereignty so that all of this can become part of a supranational body. What this supranational organization does is legislate on certain conditions or powers that the Spanish state used to have as a sovereign, and that now belong to an organization that is based in Brussels, in Luxembourg, in Strasbourg, and in Frankfurt, without having the slightest idea of what is happening in Spain. That's a huge problem. The fact that our monetary policy is in the hands of some people in Frankfurt is an outrage. It's an attack against the sovereignty of nations, because a country's economic policy is a coin with two sides, fiscal policy and monetary policy. Without monetary policy, economic policy relies solely on fiscal policy, which is a big problem, isn't it? So I believe that the harm done to the idea of identity comes directly from woke culture, which is, well, the manifestation or materialization of Agenda 2030, which of course is constantly working to undermine that fifth element of every nation, which is its own identity.
Not only to undermine it, but also to deny how important it is when it comes to defining a nation.
Claro.
It's at the very least concerning. The truth is that I also very much agree with the view you present here that identity is even more important than territory. Because I say, if in Spain, in this piece of territory, you remove the Spaniards and put 50 million Chinese people to live there, is this Spain or is this China?
Of course, exactly right. And do you know what the problem is? That democracy allows it. Our democratic system allows this to happen. I don't know if you'll want to discuss it a bit more later. I recommend everyone to read a novel by Michel Houellebecq called Submission, which at first is a dystopian novel, but I think little by little it's getting closer to the harsh reality we're seeing in the 21st century.
Like in dystopian novels?
Like in many dystopian novels, I think people will use it centuries from now to study history books as a prophetic novel about what was happening, what was obvious, and what we couldn't see. Exactly, what you said, you explained it very well. Nowadays, for example, let's use the example of the Chinese people you mentioned. A party could be formed that is a brotherhood of Chinese people living in Spain, right? Imagine this party, due to natality policies deeply rooted in Chinese culture, a moral code encouraging them to have more children and reproduce, more than Spaniards do. There comes a point when in Spain there are 25 million Chinese people or people of Chinese origin and 25 million Spaniards. That political party, that Chinese brotherhood, which brings together those 25 million Chinese people living in Spain, would have all the necessary majorities to change Spain legislatively. If Spain changes its laws, even if we're in the same group, we won't be able to talk about Spain anymore. Even if we have a government, territory, capacity, and a population within Spain's geopolitical boundaries, we can't call it Spain because the Montevideo Convention omits a crucial fifth element, the identity of nations, which has been destroyed. That's why I always say democracy is an absolutely immoral system. It's completely immoral and lacks a sense of right and wrong, relying only on what the majority decides at any moment. This is a major problem. When democracy lets a nation's identity be destroyed, we can't accept it as a valid system.